The history of Irish wrestling has so much to it, more than you probably realise. Here, we'll be exploring that history. On this episode, we'll be exploring the history of Ireland's very first professional wrestling show. This episode is also our first episode. This episode is called Blue Shirt Booker. So when you think of the history of professional wrestling in Ireland, you might think of two lads going across to England, coming back, setting up a training school. You might think of a training school popping up there in Baldoyle. You might even think of names like Balor, Becky Lynch, Fit Finlay, Sheamus. In truth, our history goes even further back than that. So in the 1930s, professional wrestling would tour around the world in the likes of America and the likes of the UK. A lot similarly to the way a circus would do tours. It would go from town to town, do put on shows, and then move on. In the 1930s was when those shows actually came to our shores. They were brought over here by someone by the name of Owen O'Duffy. Yeah, that one. And another person by the name of William Willis. The first show would have taken place in Portobello Barracks, which is now Cathal Barracks. Actually happened in November 1932. And in typical pro wrestling fashion, it was actually a charity show in aid of the National Cycling and Athletic Association. Strangely enough, the first show in Ireland was actually called All In Wrestling. There was even an article in the Sunday Independent regarding the first show. It read, "All In Wrestling comes to Dublin." It described the show as having body slams, headlocks, and clever somersaults. The crowd was described as a goodly sized crowd. So, in all intents and purposes, the first show in Ireland seems to have gone pretty well. So where did it go after this? Well, they actually held a few shows around Dublin. Now, they weren't in Portobello Barracks this time. This time they moved to the Rotunda Gardens. On the shows, they used most of the same talent, only for the fact they used another person who was supposedly from Skerries by the name of Jack O'Carroll. But to be honest with you, I think that was a bit of a work just to get some hometown babyface exposure. I also want to do a bit of a shout out to where this story came from. When we looked up the history of professional wrestling in Ireland, seeing that it went back this far and had this much depth, it was actually inspired by an article that we've seen online, which I'll link below. Okay. So in conclusion, the history of professional wrestling in Ireland goes way further back than what you probably would have realised. In typical wrestling fashion, it was a charity show, and probably the biggest thing that I took away from everything when I was reading up on this was the fact that Owen O'Duffy, of all people, was the person who had their hand in professional wrestling and bringing it over to our shores, which I think is absolutely bananas. Thanks for watching the first episode in the history of professional wrestling in Ireland. If you liked it, please leave a like, please comment, and hopefully you'll tune in next time for episode 2.